the vision to see that there was that much water, and why is Africa off limits here, and why are they begging poor for food when you could grow an abundance of food? The soils there, and if you could do it in the Libyan desert, can you imagine down there in the equator when they had all the volcanoes and just some of the most lush soils on the planet? Yet they need world food programs to keep their populace fed. Ridiculous. And you know, we've heard insects, right? I got a new one for you. Insect butter, larva fat. How about a nice big old scoop of larva fat on your GMO wheat toast? What do you think about that? Does that sound like a delicious one? Welcome back for the second half here. Mini Ice Age Conversations. Brighty on TV under uncensored every other Friday, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining me again. Before we went on the break, I was talking about Timbuktu. And what do we see here? It appears to be sand and mud and little vegetation. Well, that's what's above the ground in the Sahel, a very dry desert-ish area. You know, they do have a rainy season, but, you know, it's short and things do grow. But in the last hour, talking about the gold and the uranium that were, you know, the thing that France needs out of Niger and Mali. There's other resources as well. The natural gas pipelines, yeah, that's a bonus. But the real thing above the oil and above the gold, something even more precious, is the water resources in the aquifers beneath Africa. Now, as we come in and progress through this grand solar minimum, anything that's 40 to 45 degrees north latitude and above is going to go offline, meaning that we're not going to have nearly as robust crop yields in those areas, and also at the below. Anything 45 south and below, which takes off part of Australia, part of South Africa, looks like parts of Argentina and Chile are going to get, you know, cut in that. So if these massive crop productions come in the northern southern parts of our world, then another area needs to be established to make up for those losses. Africa. I've been pointing since years now that the Sahel would be one of the new areas that they would set up as a new growing zone. You could do a double rotation crop. And who's not there now to resist? All the fighting age men that are now in Europe, provided by the NGOs, one-way tickets. So the standing army that would have blocked the setup and then taking away of the crops that were grown, just like it is today, take away the raw minerals, make everybody work for 50 cents a day, abscond with the raw minerals, and then whatever. It would have been 2.0 with the crops. But there's a mass awakening happening in Africa now. So they're in unison rising against Western banking, central banking, and also what you consider corporations and the extraction of resources from Africa. In unison, they're all saying, stop. We're going to keep it here. We're going to have investments come in. We're going to manufacture, fabricate ourselves, and you buy our finished product from us. So in the future, you're going to see a made in Nigeria, made in Mali, made in Mauritania product on a shelf near you. That's just the way it's going to move. The pendulum's swinging back this way. Industrialization is going to come to Africa. And when it does, it'll be the most prosperous continent on the planet, for sure. But the water, this is the big thing. You're going to need water to build out a society or civilization equal with what, you know, taking Africa into the lifestyle of Americans is going to require a lot of water. You could say it requires oil, it requires money, it requires gold. No, it requires water and abundant food is what it requires. And that water would also allow you abundant hygiene. So for me, I look at this, and this is a transboundary aquifer of the world map. Jerome Powell and the Fed raised rates for the 11th time in July. The Hill warned it's a mistake that could spark a recession. Economists believe this is the last rate hike in the most aggressive rate hike cycle in history. Rate hikes are typically headwinds for gold. Meanwhile, gold has gone up over 20% since 2022. Imagine where gold and silver are going to go when the Fed stops raising and starts cutting. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call. 888-546-7020. And now on with the video. And I'm looking directly in Africa and I said, whoa, that's a lot of brown in there. What is all that? Let's zoom in a bit. So each one of these is a different aquifer in itself. So if we go up to the ones I'm most familiar with is the Sousse aquifer way west up in Morocco. And then AF63, which is the Nubian sandstone aquifer, which Muammar Gaddafi had tapped, and it was growing hundreds of thousands of acres of crops in the deserts of Libya. And that was only the first phase. He was planning to do millions and millions of acres, tapping that water resource beneath. Now, as far as I was looking, there were just in the Nubian sandstone aquifer, which is labeled AF63, there was something like 16 to 18,000 cubic kilometers of water replenished continuously from the Mediterranean Sea. This is an astounding amount of water. And then I was just blown away when we get into millions of cubic kilometers of water resources under the crust. Now you have to also keep into mind that the West African monsoon is shifting on its 4,000-year cycle, which is interesting for me because I'm talking about multi-century, multi-millennia cycles. And here we have a 4,000-year cycle in the beginning of noticeable shift. It's been the last 20 plus years or so, but it's really starting to be measurable in terms of how much above groundwater rainfall is now coming in central Mauritania into the Sahel. Now Morocco's hit or miss if the rains are coming, but definitely that central belt there. And then if you look over under Saudi Arabia, in Oman and Yemen, like the massive water resources they have there too, in addition to the yellow, that's the oil fields, but you got oil and water next to each other. Now, the main number one thing is tap it, bring it out, utilize it for agriculture. And here's another just specific groundwater resources of Africa. Anywhere you see blue, that's very high concentration, freshwater lake underground. And you can see it follows some of the same topography. And if we go back 6,000 years into the African mega lakes, we have Lake Chad, and there's all these different lake bodies that were and still are just remnants of their former gigantic selves, which would have been a Great Lake in America. And now you can kind of see to the other side. But prior, 6,000 years ago, they were more vast than our Great Lakes in America, in the center of Africa. It's interesting how explorers had maps of this, but you know, don't ask those questions about those in the 1500s, how they knew the big lakes were there, still full-ish. So here's the Nubian sandstone aquifer, and Libya is the main thing I was looking at on this one. Now you notice it does go down into Chad, which is another contender for the next coup that is going to occur. And Sudan, it really surprises me in Western Sudan why they haven't tapped all of this. Oh, they're not allowed to, or it's been kept off limits because you need a poor populace to work for $1 a day to get your rare earth minerals. As soon as they have the wealth building up, more medicine, better nutrition, they're going to tell you to jump off a bridge. We're not working for that. So put it in perspective here. Muammar Gaddafi was moving to a gold-based dinar sales for oil system outside the petrodollar. And you got to remember, this is back 10 years ago or more. And that was just all militaries descended on that place. But prior to that, what he was doing, we'll look at the different colored lines. Blue is phase one. This is what I'm talking about. Each one of those where it has a few lines, kind of looks like a little railroad track there. That was at least a minimum 100,000 hectares. And you could go up to about 250,000 acres if you want to do the conversion on that. That's where the blue lines were. That was phase one. So what he was doing was creating these giant pipelines just under the earth's surface a little bit, but they were carrying water from the Nubian sandstone aquifer. They had these giant pumping plants, and they understood like the refill rate coming off the Mediterranean Sea, and they'd mapped it out also. Obviously, if you're closer to the Med Sea, you're not going to get very good water there. It's going to be brackish. So they even had the demarcation points when you first started to come off the coast, like 100 miles inland, and then you got into some really good water. Well, then they were going to come out and start to phase two had begun already, and that's what we bombed in You know, you used to see those pictures of a whole bunch of blown up pipelines. That was the Americans bombed all that green section there, smashed it to smithereens, so there was 0% chance they could grow their own food out there. Now, the long-term plans were eventually to bring out these different areas you can see from Tobruk all the way up there. And if you're coming down on the western border from Tunisia, and eventually was going to connect through all of them like a cross trunk line between all those. That would have been like phase 6, I guess. But they were putting out millions and millions and millions of acres of crops just from the underground water resources. And they did all the calculations. They're like, we have about 3,000 years of water here. He was doing some things for his people that we don't do for our own people in the United States. But once he went to try to set up and sell for gold, the crops for gold and the oil for gold made him a target. Now, if he wouldn't have done that gold-backed thing, perhaps, maybe not, but still, the vision to see that there was that much water, and why is Africa off limits here, and why are they begging poor for food when you could grow an abundance of food? The soil's there, and if you could do it in the Libyan desert, can you imagine down there in the equator when they had all the volcanoes and just some of the most lush soils on the planet? Yet they need world food programs to keep their populace fed. Ridiculous. Just, you know, some of these things that have gone on through history, just astounding, really astounding, unbelievable. And remember, when I told you that list that I gave you for the BRICS nations of the new invitees, or those new that will be members announced here in about 2 weeks, Mexico is in that club. Now, how does Mexico, you know, connect to this? Well, this is there's a huge amount of contention between Mexico and the United States right now. They might have you believe there's all these new trade deals or buddy-buddy. Just one single case in point here to talk, because I want to stay on the theme of food. It's the most important thing. You could have bars of gold laying next to you, but if you're starving to death, they're meaningless. They really are. You could have barrels of oil laying next to you, but if you're starving to death, it doesn't matter. Unless you can use that gasoline to then pump get a machine running so you could grow food, that might be. But in itself, a resource next to you when you're starving means nothing unless it is food or green or clean, drinkable, fresh water. Those are the two most important things. Everything else stems from the ability to grow food. Everything is at the base layer, at the rock solid base layer of a civilization, its ability to produce food. It really wind it all the way back. No food, you don't have people alive or animals. So Mexican officials now want to do scientific research for the health impacts of genetically modified corn in their phase 1 trials. And then they want to move to wheat, and they have a whole bevy of others. And believe it or not, papayas is also on their list of things that they want to test genetically to see what kind of health effects this will have. And the U.S. denied the request and said, no, you can't even do it yourselves. They're not going to participate in the studies with Mexico. And a lot of that stuff is IP. Protected IP. So this is how they're going to try to say, well, you can't do that because you're going to damage the product. You're going to damage the reputation of those selling this seed. It's going to come into something like this in an international court because they don't want Mexico to test the health ramifications of genetically modified crops. Because when the first reports come out, and that's basically what the West offers foodstuffs to the world and to its citizens, there's going to be huge blowback. So the United States denied all requests to do any types of research with Mexico on this, and will not participate. So I'll even read it for you word for here. This comes from Mexican Deputy Agriculture Minister Victor Suarez. He said in an interview with Reuters, the U.S. denied this request and made it clear it will not participate in a new scientific study with Mexico. Quote, they did not want to establish a period in which the two parties agreed to carry out impact studies on animal health and human health. That's a big one. This is just as gigantic of a movement of the pendulum as Africa saying no more of our natural resources are leaving. Western nations not welcome anymore. We're going to keep it all in the country now. Resource nationalism is the theme of Africa moving forward. Well, now the health implications, there's been a lot of independent people that have tried to get these studies, but they either end up defunded, mysterious accidents happen to them, and those that have tried to bring this to light no longer have careers. There's been a huge amount of research on this. I mean, it'll turn your stomach looking at the rat diet experiments with just GM product, but they're feeding that to us. So I applaud Mexico for bringing it to the forefront. And it's just sad that the companies controlling America, and I'm going to say the companies controlling, there's no politicians controlling anything. The puppets is what they are. The corporations and the central banks control our country. But they're also with their backs against the wall going, another country is going to now talk about how is this going to reel and shatter and shake markets in an already half destabilized planet. So here's your list of GMOs. The majority of major crops in the US are GM, obviously, genetically modified. The canola, otherwise used to be known as rapeseed oil. The corn, obviously, any of the corns that you get. I try to go to my Amish farm and buy corn, and we had gotten a whole bunch of their heirloom seeds. And I'll give you a little trick here, because I got this book here, Farming the Woods, for anybody interested in kind of what I'm doing and how I'm seeing things for food base here. Farming the Woods. There's a book I'm reading right now, how to intercrop inside, because I have 25 acres out, or 23 and some acres out here, and half of it's forest on nice hillside, shady. There's different, microclimates within it. Some of it gets more sun, some of it's more shady. So I wanted to be able to establish maybe some mushroom growing or some other types of ginseng or gingers or whatever to disperse across through my forest floor and allow that to grow over time. Farming in the woods. Also, corn. If you go this year to an Amish farm and you find that what they call Indian corn, it's labeled Indian corn, it's the dried corn that has all the pretty different colors. You get those like purples in it, and there's yellows and starburst yellows and red, yellow starburst, and it's not one uniform color. You know exactly what I'm talking about, that Indian corn. Once it's dry, that's your heirloom seed right there. All you have to do is once it dries, just twist it and all those kernels will fall off and just separate them out into the different colors. And generally, if you don't plant any of the different species together, like we got a real beautiful dark purple variety this year. So you've seen blue corn chips. Well, we have a dark purple. So, same thing, it'll be like a dark purple corn chip. So we planted that with no other varieties around and hoping that it will not cross-pollinate, that it will only stay that dark purple variety that we so like. Where did I find that? Oh, over at the Amish farm. They were selling, those dried corns that you see every single October for Halloween. So make sure you keep your eyes out for that. That is the cheapest, purest form and easiest way to get your hands on heirloom corn seed. And non-commercial varieties, these are the original varieties that never were commercialized. So you're going to get like an old world, literally old world variety that came from, Mexico somewhere. A lot of it originated in Mexico. So I got off topic a little bit there. The cotton GM, that we don't eat the cotton, though. The soy, almost 94% of it's GM. Sugar beets, I did not know that. But sugar beets are mainly for ethanol anyway. So, and then we have the papaya. Now, this is coming from a study out of Hawaii. So the papaya, Florida papaya, Texas, these kind of places where they grow these fruits, citrus fruits, etc. And if these gigantic amount of GMO health reports come out, it's going to shake the foundations of agriculture itself. You thought the Bud Light boycott was something. What happens if there's an American grain boycott? In addition to an oil embargo like that happened in the 1970s. Just those two things would bring us to a third world nation. If every country across the planet did just these three things, they don't have to do it forever. They can continue to just milk it out. It's not going to be one gigantic crash. It's going to be a perpetual crash. If they stop buying the treasury bonds, nobody wants American debt anymore. If they stop buying American grains and there's a demand across the planet, we do not want GM crops, and those stop buying American grains. and then those in the oil producing nations suddenly cut off America and say there's another oil embargo. If those three things happen, our lives here would be very Venezuelan-ish that fast. It would take days, weeks. You would notice it after the first month you're in it. So bringing me to my point here off of Reuters, that's why there's this push into insects. And you know, we've heard insects, right? I got a new one for you. Insect butter, larva fat. How about a nice big old scoop of larva fat on your GMO wheat toast? What do you think about that? Does that sound like a delicious one? Scientists are experimenting with larva fat to replace butter. They soak the insects in water and then mush them with a blender before a centrifuge separates the butter-like creamy substance. Oh, I can see the marketing campaign for it already. If you thought some of those canola spreads were good, you ain't seen nothing yet. When they bring out the larva fat spread, oh, they're going to make it like goose fat. They're going to tease you with holiday images of dripping goose fat right on the, oh, wait for it. I'd seen something similar, though, and this is bamboo caterpillars. When I was in northern Thailand, there's only one time a year it happens, and they get these little green caterpillars that come out of the tubes inside the bamboo. They would do the same thing. They would boil it, and then they would mash it, but then they would take the mash cake and then cook it in oil and make like a patty out of it. Kind of sweet. It had a sweet flavor to it. I tried one. Nothing like, you know, trying to separate out two different solids or whatever. No. Same, but different, like they say in Thailand. Same, but different. So we got BlackRock and Vanguard. You know, they're trying to take over all the food production in the United States. Well, they're going to try to control it across the planet, too. Don't delude yourself. So Africans are firewalling everything off. The BRICS nations are going to firewall it off. See, I don't know how deep BlackRock and Vanguard have their fingers in the rest of the BRICS nations. I would think, you know, since they have trillions under management, pretty deep as well. So whatever comes next, there's going to be a concerted effort to control the food and the resources around the planet. Not in control of the previous controllers. There's going to be a struggle, and then they're going to have many extra hands in the pot trying to pull out and then sell globally. So there's going to be a huge shakeup, and expect disruptions in some things moving forward. We'll see how the coups go. But anyway, I thought you might like the information from today. Look for the Sahel for your answers. It's all right in front of you. Bye for now.